able to introduce you to Jenny Pemberton, Rio2 Stakeholder Engagement Manager, Jonathan Thorns, Assistant Development Manager, Engineer at Bacton Gas Terminal, and Michael Mahone, Category Manager for Gas Transmission at National Grid Gas. Bacton Gas Terminal is just up the road from me. I can see the lights from Bacton from my house. Unfortunately, I still can't get gas at home, something that I regularly report to my colleagues and friends at National Grid. But delighted to have them with us today. A great facility we have on the coast here of Norfolk. This is a major industrial facility of national significance across the UK, handling anywhere between sort of 30 and 50% of the nation's gas. And I guess we're really fascinated to know, what the future holds for Bacton at the terminal there, and the future for gas. And I think hopefully we're going to learn a wee bit more about that today. So at that point, I will relinquish my screen over to Jenny and Jenny Pemberton of National Grid. Jenny, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Very kind of you to have us here today. Before we start, I'll talk you through what we'll cover during today's session. I'm aware from the poll results that most of you have had some sort of interaction with us at some point or another. But in the interests of those that haven't, I'll start by giving a bit of background and setting the context a little bit. Then we'll talk about the Bacton terminal, our proposals and aspirations for the construction. And then we'll move on to procurement and how we'll be tendering for the work. And then we'll open up for any questions. So there'll be three of us talking today, as Simon mentioned. There's myself. Simon introduced me, so I'm the stakeholder manager for National Grid Gas, and I've been supporting Johnny in understanding what stakeholders need of the site. That leads us nicely on to Johnny, who is developing the proposals for the future of the site. And lastly, we've got Michael, who's the procurement manager that's supporting us on the project. Right, so we'll start with a short animation. Oh, if we can get it working. I might have to reshare my screen. Sorry, apologies, guys. There seems to be a slight hiccup. There we go. Right. A short animation for you.
Hello there. We are National Grid. Most people have heard of us, but most people don't really know what we do. So, what do we do exactly? And why should you be interested? National Grid actually plays an important role in your everyday life because we connect millions of people to the energy they use. Now, there are three main stages to providing energy to homes and businesses.
Apologies, I don't know what happened there.
Hello there. We are National Grid. Most people have heard of us, but most people don't really know what we do. So, what do we do exactly? And why should you be interested? National Grid actually plays an important role in your everyday life because we connect millions of people to the energy they use. Now, there are three main stages to providing energy to homes and businesses: production, transmission, and distribution. National Grid doesn't produce gas or electricity. We don't deliver it directly to your door. We're in charge of the transmission side of things. In other words, we transport it across England, Wales and Scotland for gas, and across England and Wales for electricity, connecting the producers with the distributors. And our gas business also helps to balance supply with demand, making sure we get the gas from where it comes into the country to where it's needed. Delivering energy to consumers can be likened to travelling along a road network. Allow us to explain. Think of National Grid's network as the motorway system of the energy world. Energy is produced, and then it must be delivered over great distances across the country. This is where National Grid comes in. We transport gas at very high pressures and electricity at very high voltages. But the pressure and voltage are too high to be used in homes or businesses. So, we connect to companies who operate regional gas and electricity networks at lower pressures and voltages. These are known as distribution networks. Distribution networks are the equivalent of the A roads, country lanes and city streets that lead right to your door. Finally, you pay a supplier, your utilities company, for the use of this gas and electricity. And a part of that payment covers the cost of National Grid's network. National Grid is classed as a natural monopoly, which means there are no other networks in competition with ours. Because of this, we're overseen by Ofgem, the energy regulator. They set limits on how much we charge our customers to make sure people aren't paying more than they need to for our services. National Grid plays a vital role in getting gas and electricity to where it needs to be. And we're always interested in hearing your views, so that we can deliver a system that meets your needs not only today, but in the future too.
Okay, thank you for your patience in the slight hiccup there. Apologies, I needed to turn off one of my alerts. Right, so that was an animation that talked about both sides of our business, but we're here today to talk to you about the gas side of the business. So as it mentioned, our role is to move gas from where it's brought into the country to where it's needed, connecting millions of people all over the country to the energy they need safely, reliably and efficiently. We own and operate the gas transmission system, which is made up of over 7,600 kilometres of high pressure pipe, so that's around up to 94 bar. And we have 24 compressor stations that push the gas through the pipes, and over 600 above ground installations, so that's valves and things like that, to control and inspect the network. We've also got day-to-day responsibility for balancing the supply with demand, because we've got very little, well, no control over where the gas comes in and where it's used on the network. This diagram on the right gives you a bit of an idea of what the network looks like, and also where the gas comes in and where it's used. So, over the past 60 years, the way that we use gas today hasn't changed that much, although we do see it evolving significantly over the next 50 years. Today, around 995 terawatt hours of energy is delivered by the NTS. That's over 3 times that's transmitted for the electricity system. If we break that down, that's nearly 40% of it is used to generate electricity. About the same is used to heat our homes, and the final 20% is used for industrial purposes. There's currently around 22 million domestic consumers connected to the gas distribution networks. And whilst the amount of domestic gas consumption is reducing due to efficiencies, the number of connections actually continues to grow. So as the animation mentioned, we are a monopoly, and our regulator Ofgem sets how much we're allowed to earn. And that is calculated through this formula. So the revenue we earn is made up of the outputs that we commit to deliver, the money we make through outperforming the incentives that we've got, and finally any innovation funding that we get. We've been through an extensive engagement exercise over the last 3 years to build our business plans for the next regulatory period, which will run from 2021 to 2026. This plan sets out what we believe our outputs, incentives, etc. should be, and our business plans are currently being reviewed and assessed. We'll receive a draft determination in July, which should give us an indication of what we will get, with final determinations in December as to what our allowances will be. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Johnny, who will now talk a bit more about the Bacton Terminal. Johnny?
All right, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. So I thought I'd start off with just setting the scene around why we're looking at Bacton Terminal, why we need to, invest in it in the next 5 years or so. And to start with, I think Simon said Bacton Terminal was commissioned in 1968, but just to put that into some context, that was a year before the moon landings and the same year that Martin Luther King was assassinated. So since then, basically the terminal's been operating 100%. I don't think it's ever had an outage, and it provides us as National Grid and the NTS National Transmission System with a huge amount of flexibility that we're going to need going forward. Oh, I've gone too far. And because it's so old and has developed over 50 years, you can see the picture on the left is what it started off as, and the picture on the right is where it is today. And what's essentially happened is it's slowly formed over 50 years, adding bits and taking bits away, ultimately becoming quite a large and integral part of the system. But what's really key to add is that most of the original equipment is still in place. So some of the equipment that you can see on that picture on the left-hand side is still operating today and is still pumping gas through onto the national transmission system. Just in case you're not aware, I guess, this shows you where Bacton Terminal is. You can see it sort of connects onto 5 of our major pipelines, 2 of which go down to London. So we use it as one of our main ways of maintaining pressures in the southeast and maintaining gas supplies to London and the whole of the southeast. A lot of the gas comes in from offshore, but also it's our big interconnector hub as well. So we've got 2 interconnectors that connect to Bacton, one to Belgium and one to the Netherlands. And again, just a bit of context, it's approximately £4 billion worth of throughput each year comes through Bacton. So that sort of just gives a bit of an indication as to how important that site is for us as National Grid. As Jenny said, the way that we've used gas over the last 50 or so years hasn't really changed a lot. We do envisage it changing in the next 50 years as we sort of head towards a much greener and net zero scenarios. But what this graph is trying to show is just how important Bacton Terminal is alongside some of our other terminals in the future, regardless of net zero, and how much we still need to be able to operate it reliably and safely. You know, and at peak, it's often supplying about 30% of the UK's gas, so during winter, usually that is. And we think up until 2050, which is about where our future energy scenarios go out to, Bacton will still be required in one form or another. So that's just a bit of background. I'll go into what we're proposing for our next regulatory period. So taking all of that I've just said into account, we essentially have a bit of a problem statement that we formed for Bacton, which is that the terminal there has a number of age-related asset health and obsolescence issues. You know, we're understanding that it's 50 years old, and with that comes a range of asset health problems and issues that we need to think about. And we, as part of our RIIO-2 investment decisions, really tried to take the time to understand what customers and stakeholders need from the terminal, both now, so 2020, and out to 2050 and probably beyond 2050, and how we can support our customers' business strategies, make the right investment decisions, and deliver the right outcome for both the environment and the local community, I think is really important. Support security of supply and really benefit the wider GB PLC. So a bit about where how we've gone about that in developing our proposals. We start off with basically a needs case. You know, what does the network actually require from Bacton, and then develop that into looking at what the current condition of site is. We knew it was 50 years old. We knew it had some asset health issues, but we really want to understand exactly where those issues are, because that would then inform our high-level strategies. And we just work to develop options. And I think this is where a lot of our stakeholders have proven invaluable, where we've taken a lot of time and our stakeholders have taken a lot of time to engage and really feedback on what our plans were, whether they would fit into future strategies, whether people want to see something different, ultimately forming into what we submitted to Ofgem, which I think I'll share on the next page, which is a real stakeholder-led plan, which hopefully meets what all the stakeholders across the site need from it. So during RIIO-2, which is our next price control, we're proposing a number of investments at Bacton, and these sort of fall into two broad pots of tactical and strategic. Tactical, we appreciate that regardless of what option that we choose to take forward into the future and how we choose to position Bacton in the future, there's an amount of almost least regrets asset health that needs to happen. So this is the work that has to be done just to maintain the terminal for the next 5 years or so. And it has to be carried out almost independent of what the future strategy is to some degree. There's also, being a top tier coma site, one of the key sites for the UK, there's quite a big, anyone who's been there will know there's quite a big emphasis on security. And all that security infrastructure needs quite a bit of work, perimeter fence replacements, gate replacements, and a general asset refresh. And then since it was commissioned, we've got a number of areas that have slowly become redundant, and we would just choose to get rid of those in RIIO-2. Mainly abandoned pipe work, old boilers that just need to we need to remove, more for safety than anything else. And then there's the sort of the big ones, this strategic or future strategy work, and what we've developed through our RIIO-2 proposals is that we think the best solution to make sure long-term operation of Bacton is to almost redevelop the site completely, probably in its current place on that terminal complex, but really start almost from scratch and think about how we meet the current and future needs, and also thinking about how that terminal will meet net zero targets both now and in the future. So this sort of strategic piece, it needs to go through a full, design study, feasibility study. It's very high level at the minute, but our initial plans are to, like I said, redevelop or a brownfield construction of the whole terminal. And that redevelopment, we've some of the things it needs to be operating until 2050. We recognise that it has to be able to adapt to a number of future possibilities, and at the minute it's quite difficult to design it specifically for one future possibility. So we need to come up with a design or work with the supply chain to come up with a design that enables possible hydrogen, possible carbon capture, blending, and those sort of scenarios. There's obviously we can't turn off Bacton Terminal, so there's a huge piece of work that needs to happen in terms of how we manage constructing and commissioning what we term the new terminal, in line with keeping the old terminal online and keeping gas flowing to all our customers. And the way we've sort of structured this in our business plan is we've said we'd like to do a fairly significant feed study, just to understand all the options and make sure that the brownfield redevelopment is actually the right option for our customers and the consumers. And then once we've decided on that being the best option, we'd then go and build it, basically go through the full detailed design, build, commission process as per any normal investment, really. So if anyone read our business plan, you'll have seen that we've requested about 144 million, although some of that is subject to change, depends on what option we do settle on in the end. So I think that brings us on to our capital carbon target for RIIO-2. So one of the other key points we've said in our business plan is sort of appreciating that we need to work towards a net zero world. And specifically at Bacton Terminal, this means we've committed to a net zero carbon construction by the end of our RIIO-2 period. So, and then that'll be supported by an offsetting policy, and it's based on our current assumptions. There's 2 projects in there, obviously Bacton, I've said. There's also another compressor rebuild project at Wormington that will fall into that category. I won't go into that too much here. But what does that actually mean in reality? Well, what we include in that is the manufacture of any construction materials and equipment, any construction plant and site energy use during the construction phase, all of the waste and all of the transport. All of that, when looked at across the project and the construction part of the project, needs to be net zero or offsetted to net zero. What we are excluding is stuff like energy use in operation. So once it's operational, that's not included in this. Any ongoing maintenance activities and any other sort of fugitive emissions during operation. So that's if we're venting after commission. And I think just to sort of put a bit of numbers behind how big a challenge that could be. Here's some sort of fairly typical assets or buildings that we would use on probably on Bacton Terminal, and the projected carbon for the manufacture and installation of those assets. So, you know, ball valve, you can see is 46,000 kilograms of CO2 approximately that we need to reduce and then offset. And there's going to be a key bit here about reducing, because I don't think we can offset all of it. And just, you may or may not have seen, we recently released the Net Zero Energy Workforce Report. It was published last year. And this is really setting out what skills and roles will be required for a net zero future. So by 2050, what skills and roles we think will be required. And that's covering new and existing roles. So just out of interest, if you're interested in that, the link is there. So that's sort of a broad overview of what we're proposing at Bacton Terminal. You can sort of see some of the challenges that we're going to be facing, but also some of the opportunities, hopefully. And I think that will be me passing to Michael to tell you a bit about the procurement process.
Whilst we're waiting for the swap over, just to say that if you can ask questions through the chat function, please. So in the centre of your screen, that little arrow pointing upwards, ask questions via the chat function. I'll put your questions to our panel later on at the end of the presentation. So over to you, Michael.
All right, come off mute there. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm just going to talk to you slightly about the approach that we're taking on the Bacton Terminal from a procurement perspective to go through the work that and deliver the work that Johnny outlined earlier. So in terms of the contract, we're splitting into two lots. So the first one is what we're calling the feed and the design and build, and that's related to the future operating strategy. So as Johnny was explaining, we have a certain amount of money that's been allowed for us to undertake some feed work, and then that will be funded by the uncertainty mechanism once we've finalized the key elements of the solution. Therefore, to enable that, we're putting in place a two-stage contract with a single supplier to undertake this feed and then subsequently undertake the design and build following the successful completion of the uncertainty mechanism. Now, in addition to that, there's also some what we call asset health, redundant assets, and the security of the existing terminal assets that also need to be undertaken as well. So that's now going to form lot 2. So a contractor will be looking to also complete those package of civil and mechanical works alongside doing the feed. It is our intention to try and award both lots to a single contractor if we find during the procurement process that is the most cost-efficient way to go about that. However, it's not mandatory, and yeah, it all depends on what the bids look like when we come back. So we're leaving the flexibility open to enable us to get the best contractors doing each of the lots that we've just outlined here on the screen. So normally when I present opportunities and contractual opportunities for National Grid, the next logical question I often get is, how do we become part of the supply chain? So National Grid, as you know, is a regulated business, and therefore we undergo regulated procurement procedures. So all of our procurement processes are governed by what's called the Utilities Contract Regulations, which effectively, in a nutshell, means we have to look to advertise our works and requirements to the widest possible market choices as possible via approved routes, which are outlined in the Utilities Contracts Regulations, or UCR. So the primary way that we go to market is utilizing the Achilles database. And that database is a open database by the Achilles Corporation, where any supplier really can apply to put themselves on under a series of codes. And those codes represent the services and products that you'll be able to supply, not only to National Grid as a utility, but to all utilities in the United Kingdom. And then what we would do is, anytime we have a new procurement event, we would type in the relevant codes, and all suppliers, regardless of their size, will be displayed, and then we will send out the tender information to those suppliers under those codes. So Achilles database is the main portal by which we interact with the market. It's our approved way of doing so, and it just allows us to be able to get to market and access the suppliers that have already gone through a bit of a vetting and auditing process to ensure that they've got the right safety procedures, environmental procedures, and any other key procedures to make sure we're acting as a responsible supplier. In addition to that, and as part of our ethical code of conduct, we've introduced the supplier code of conduct. So National Grid is a responsible business, and as part of that responsibility, we make sure that our suppliers are also acting responsibility when they're working on our behalf. So our supplier code of conduct just outlines some of the expectations of our supply chain, and they reflect our value and the values that we want to project onto society. So a lot of them are very basic things around making sure that you're paying individuals a living wage, adhering to the various health and safety legislation in the UK, and other basic aspects of being a good supplier. Those are things that we fundamentally expect of our supply chain, and that's a supplier code of conduct that we have developed, that as part of becoming part of our supply chain, you have to sign and state that you will be adhering to that. And just on the below here, there's the website. All this information is on our National Grid website. My name is on the National Grid website for anyone that wants to get in contact with myself or any of my colleagues in the procurement department who are able to want to become part of our supply chain. So that website there is available for your reference. Okay, and I just want to also highlight some of our SME engagement. So, looking at the figures involved with the Bacton Terminal, it's a large portfolio of work, and our strategy might bias itself to some of the larger contractors. So I wanted to just highlight some of the SME engagement approaches that we're taking to show that we are trying to engage all aspects of the local economy as well. So we have a specific commitment at National Grid to ensure that £1 of every 3 is spent with SMEs. And that can be either directly from National Grid or via our Tier 1 mainworks contractors. So last year, we achieved 22% towards that goal. The data for 1920, which is the last financial year that was just completed, is being compiled, but I'm being told that we'll be trending in the right direction in there. And then our other commitment is also to promote local supply through various large projects. So, for example, with the Hinkley project that's happening at the moment, one of the requirements of the development consent order was to ensure that we promote local supply. So, if we do have large mainworks contractors, we are encouraging those mainworks contractors and are part of those mainworks contractors' assessment processes to ensure that they're pulling on the local supply chain to the area that they're doing construction works for National Grid, and just making sure that we're not just doing work outside the community, we're involving the community in doing those works as well, and hopefully having a positive impact on the local economy as well. And we've got a number of corporate social responsibilities, which again is on the website, so I won't go into too much detail, but it's around our economic, social, foundation and environmental CSR responsibilities. So they not only apply to our contractors or big contractors that we work with directly, but we also try and promote those and encourage our SMEs to also undertake their work in line with those principles as well. So those objectives are also on the website. Okay, so I just want to finish up here with a timeline, just showing you some of the timelines. So at the moment, we're just put together the various tender documents that we need to be able to go out to market. So we're looking to go out to market in July. Now, this tender process intersects with the timelines that we're going to get back from Ofgem, our various determinations. So the first one being in July, and the final off-gem determination being in December. It intersects elements of the tender process, so that gives us a little bit of flexibility to adjust our tendering processes depending on what the outcome of those determinations are. But once we've gone through those various stages, we'll be looking to award very early on in April 2021, of which we'll start the FEED. Going alongside that scope of the FEED, we'll also be doing the options and scoping for the various asset health and security works as part of that agreement, and those will continue on throughout, as these are separate work streams not related to the main future operating strategy for Bacton. We will then go through the whole process, and we're looking to gain operational acceptance in about Q2 in 2026. So it's a long-term project. It's a significant investment in the area. So we're trying to just demonstrate that, you know, this is not a quick project. This is a long-term project which will hopefully have long-term economic benefits while the project is going on and once the asset is up and running. Okay. Okay, and I think we've got a quick poll question as well, which is on the Slido. And this is something that, you know, the team is looking to do. We would like to know what type of information you would like to see prior to us going out to market. So we've been doing a lot of engagement already with some of the big tier 1 contractors around this event and how we're going to contract and some of the timelines involved. But I'm keen to understand the kind of information that some of the other supply chain, whether you're an SME or might be supporting via a mainworks contractor, what kind of information you would like to see before we go out to market. So if you can provide that information, we'll factor that into our engagement strategy to make sure we address those before we launch the event in July. Okay, I think that's it for me, and I think we'll pass it over to any questions now.
Hi, thanks so much there, Simon here again. That was a great presentation. Thank you very much indeed. Some fascinating facts and figures going back over time. I hadn't realised that. My God, it was Martin Luther King's assassination was at the same time as Bacton was open, and some phenomenal facts and figures there. £4 billion a year going through the Bacton terminal. It's some staggering sums. Yeah, a few questions are coming through. One of which is, and this is an old one for lots of EEGR members in the oil and gas sector, which is the use of Achilles. So are you saying that people have to use Achilles? Or is Achilles just something that's a tool that you use amongst a whole host of different tools? And if it is Achilles, I've been asked as well, is it UVDB or FPAL?
Oh, good question. So yes, so if National Grid is going to contract with any supplier directly, we will have to go through Achilles. Like I said, that's part of the utilities contract regulations. So anyone that is interested or feels that they'll be able to contribute to the event directly with National Grid needs to be on Achilles. We will be using UVDB, not FPAL. So the UVDB is the section of which you need to sign up towards. And like I said, there's a suite of various codes on there. I'm going to review the codes as well, but if you just register yourself under the mechanical civil construction code, that will make sure that you appear in our search.
I don't know whether it's possible to ask for any exemptions from that at all. One of the issues we have is that a number of SMEs, I see quite clearly you want to boost the number of SMEs you're dealing with, which I think is laudable. However, I guess one of the issues there is lots of SMEs can't afford Achilles. Achilles is a very, very expensive tool, and whilst I can understand you need to have some sort of pre-qualification system, it does automatically exclude lots and lots of SMEs. Is there any way you could look at any exemptions, or could or would you be able to provide any assistance with SMEs to be able to access Achilles or anything of that nature?
So I'm not sure about exemptions, but I can definitely look at where we can help and assist on Achilles getting suppliers getting onto that Achilles database. So we have a account manager directly with Achilles that helps us manage the various suppliers that we work with on Achilles. So if I take that away to her, I can look to get some advice from her about how we can provide some assistance in that area.
Thank you. And I think it's a lofty aspiration you have to get £1 in every £3 invested with SMEs. by 2022. I think the question that comes up in these kind of areas is, that's great, but how are you measuring that? What's the criteria by which you're going to measure that, so that SMEs can hopefully have clarity on that and have clarification on it?
Yeah. Yes, yeah, I can tell you that. So we have a sustainability and sort of corporate social responsibility procurement manager within our department. And how we measure it is by interrogating our direct spend, but also interrogating the spend of our tier 1 suppliers. So as part of getting paid, our suppliers also have to declare what they are subsequently spending with SMEs, and that's how we keep track of it. It's quite an intensive process, but we've got the system set up to try and make that as slick as possible. And that's how we gathered the data for last year. It's a little bit of a delay for the data this year due to the current environment, but yeah, I think that's our main way of auditing those numbers.
Okay, I've got a question of Andy Holyland, who's from ORE Catapult, which you may or not be familiar with. It says, as part of the FEED project, are there innovation, testing, validation, and demonstrator project built into that process to provide opportunities to future-proof the terminal and be in a position to successfully adapt to future needs, as mentioned, such as hydrogen, CCUS, blending, etc.? Johnny, your mic's turned off.
You're on mute, Johnny.
There you go. Maybe give me some time.
Go for it.
So the simple answer is yes, there will be. I think that so National Grid, we've got a number of innovation opportunities ongoing, especially regarding hydrogen, CCUS, blending. And I think we're looking to make sure Bacton's on the radar of all of that, and then opening up to new innovation opportunities. So the simple answer is yes, but I can't give much detail as to how at the minute.
And I think I've already opened a dialogue between yourself and Andy Holyland, ORE Catapult. Andy's recently appointed into the region. And obviously, Catapult and EEEGR and lots of others in the region are very keen to know more about futures at Bacton. And I don't know whether we ought to look at another session or what, but in terms of things like hydrogen onto the system, I think that's going to be and blending. I think that those are fairly big subjects in their own right. So I don't know whether you want to touch on where you are currently with that, or whether you'd like to think about doing a separate session on that totally at some point, perhaps.
So I think a separate session will probably be a good idea. I think because of the way that we're regulated, we have to be quite careful in segregating the two, the sort of Bacton rebuild and hydrogen innovation opportunities off. So we're looking at how we integrate all of that together. But I think the best thing would be to do a second or separate webinar on the hydrogen innovation opportunities.
Absolutely, Johnny. We're looking at opportunities to collaborate with our ventures and some other partners on that webinar to bring a few areas together and talk about hydrogen and the opportunities there.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to a future event with you guys later on then. John Best is always wanting to ask questions, I'm delighted to say, my predecessor at EEEGR. John's saying, will all your new pumps be electric?
By pumps,
I'm assuming compressors. Yeah.
He's talking about compressors.
So Bacton itself, the National Grid terminal at Bacton doesn't have any compression facilities. They sit with Interconnector, who do also live on the same site. So there won't be any new compression on the National Grid side of Bacton.
Okay. Kevin Greentree is asking, how will you encourage innovation to achieve your net zero objectives? I guess we touched on that in terms of hydrogen things, but I guess that's again possibly something for that other future event. But nonetheless, let's put you on the spot for a second. So how are you looking at achieving net zero?
Is that something you could answer, Michael? Possibly how we sort of incentivize?
Yeah, I can incentivize that. So so as part of going out to market and for large construction projects, we've developed what's called a carbon interface tool. And that carbon interface tool just allows the sustainability team within National Grid to assess the net carbon impact of a particular contractor's proposal on the environment and the local infrastructure. And as part of that, we use that carbon interface tool as part of the assessment process to award a contractor. So effectively, the more closer you are to a net zero carbon solution in your approach to solving the Bacton terminal, the better score that you will get, and therefore the higher chance you will win the contractor, who will win the tender. So that's the main way that we encourage and also reward contractors for really good environmentally friendly solutions as well. And as part of it, also during contract, we also encourage contractors to start thinking around innovative solutions whilst we're in contract as well. So once we're on site and any other ideas that get floated up, we're quite happy to adjust the plan or the program if it's going to result in a much more carbon friendly solution. So that's how we mainly encourage all of our suppliers, whether that be directly or indirectly via our tier ones and the SMEs that are involved, to contribute to our sort of carbon standards in that space.
Thank you, Michael. You put up a slide there, Michael, that showed some of the values of the projects you're looking at, just to give our delegates some sort of scale. I did a quick totting up about, I looked about 170 million odd. What's the total value of the project potentially?
Well, there's 147 million, if I remember rightly, on the future operating strategy, and then I had 25 million for what we call in the asset health, the security, and the redundant assets. So it's about 170. Yeah.
Sounds about right. Great stuff. So it's a sizable opportunity for those delegates that are online at the moment. And obviously, Michael, you're the point of contact for anything in relation to supply chain, and your details were on that slide, which will be sent out to everyone, and links will be sent out to everyone there as well. So thank you for that. John Best has another question for you. Can you confirm that you'll always transmit energy, both gas and electric, as opposed to generating any energy? And this was something I raised at the meeting I had with you in Norwich, which seems like very different times, where could we perhaps look at, could National Grid invest in a hydrogen powered generating station in Bacton, and looking at things of that sort of nature. I think at that point you quite rightly put us onto National Grid Ventures. I think it is in terms of, there's a separate division of National Grid that looks at the ways in which you might be able to invest in other areas. But perhaps I don't know who's best to handle.
Simon, I'll pick that up if you want.
Bridget, Bridget, if you could, so the different investment areas of National Grid, obviously electric, gas, etc., but also in terms of ventures and what you're looking at there. And again, I guess how to make contact with different divisions as well, please.
Okay, so hi everybody, I'm Bridget Hartley. I'm the Strategy and Business Planning Manager for Gas Transmission. In terms of getting heavily involved in any generation of any energy, our licence actually prohibits that. So I can't see a world where gas transmission will get involved in the production of hydrogen in the future. That's not to say that our non-regulated business, as Simon mentioned, ventures, could potentially get involved, although it's not necessarily as straightforward. We have to really have that clear regulatory water, so it has to be a completely separate part of our business. And they are definitely looking at sort of opportunities in the carbon capture, usage and storage, and in the hydrogen space. So, but as gas transmission, there is no way I think we could ever, as a regulated business, get involved with generating hydrogen. And it's similar for our electricity business. Now, within our plan, we have requested funding to put solar panels on our site for our own use electricity, and we have precedent on that on some of our sites. So at both the key sites in Warwick and Wokingham, we have solar panels on those sites for our own use, and Ofgem have given us permission for that. And so we're expecting that where it's primarily for our own use, we will be able to put solar panels onto site because there's a precedent being set there. But I hope that answers the question.
Thank you for that, Bridget. It does. It answers John's follow-up question, which was for your, but both for generation and for your own use, and you've answered that. So thank you very much indeed for that one. Another one, as part of the tender process for feed, will there be a PQQ process or straight to full invitation to tender in July?
Yes, I'll take that one. So yes, there will be a PQQ process. So in July, when I say we're starting the event, we're launching a PQQ, and that's going to be via Achilles. We'll use those responses to then whittle down the bidders to a reasonable number, and then we'll send them a full ITT following that, which is going to be scheduled. I think it's for September.
For those delegates that may not want to identify themselves, if you can send any questions through to esme.thornton@eeger.com, and she'll then put them up there for me to be able to ask any other questions. Michael, whilst you're on there, just going back to the pre-qualifications and Achilles, I don't know how we might be able to do this, giving access to smaller organisations and sole traders that want to try and work with other levels and tiers within the supply chain.
Yeah.
But that's something I'd welcome a conversation with you on, to see whether there is a way in which we can somehow make sure that we're not excluding anyone from the process, which I think is absolutely key there. So thank you for that as well. I don't want to probably here for Johnny, but Johnny, can you just explain your interactions there with the other stakeholders at Bacton there? Obviously, we've got Shell, we've got Perenco there, and I think you have regular meetings with them. Would you like just to touch on that and explain how that works and how you guys all work together, I guess?
Yeah, so currently, I think, as on a terminal level, they have very regular meetings. I think they're monthly meetings between the National Grid terminal manager and the other terminal managers on the complex. Throughout sort of developing our RIIO2 plans, I think we've had fairly regular meetings with Shell, Perenco, IUK, BBL, and all the other stakeholders. And we'll be looking to continue that going on to a project. We're still sort of developing that into some sort of strategy and working out how we're going to communicate with everyone as it moves more into the project side of things rather than the strategic side of things. But it is something we're fully planning on keeping on going, because it's been pretty successful, I think.
Indeed. So at the last workshop that we held, we did ask that exact question: how would you like to engage with us going forward? And a lot of people said that they would like to continue to have one-to-ones on a regular basis, and then have regular, broader conversations like this sort of thing. And I was talking earlier about potentially using Zoom and then having breakup sessions within those, and that might be an option as well. So like Johnny says, we're putting together our proposals, and we'll come out and ask what people think about that soon.
And we really welcome your participation in that as well. And please do talk to us on that front, and we'll try and assist in any way we can. I think that's just about our hour up. But before I close the session down, do any of you there from National Grid have any other points that you wish to put across? So we have one more question just come through, anonymous. What about Southern Hub Asset Rationalisation Project, SHARP, and do they have any involvement?
So no is the easy answer, but possibly worth a separate discussion to determine whether they should have some involvement. But I think at the minute, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thanks for that. And yes, do any of you guys have any final points before I start bringing things to a close?
So just from me, kind of linking to your point earlier, Simon, around what you'd like to hear from us in the future. We're obviously keen to run a net zero / hydrogen version of this. Is there anything else in particular about this area that you'd like us to go into a little bit more detail, potentially further along as the project progresses? Are there certain touch points that you would like us to target, or topics that you'd like us to cover?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is where probably a conversation with Andy Holyland and EEGR, so RE Catapult, ourselves, probably either the OGA or on a Gas UK as well, and possibly doing a whole session on energy transition and net zero and how the various different stakeholders are getting involved in that, and how we might be able to pull that together. I think Andy has spoken to you in the past about the sort of vision that we're gradually building for the region. And there's also Mark Goodall with the New Anglia LEP, who chairs this All Energy Industry Council, and I would suggest that presentations through them as well. So I think it's really just trying to help us draw together a strategy for our region would be great, which we can then articulate back to our membership would be really useful from my perspective, and hope from our member perspectives as well. So yeah, as various stakeholders here today have said, that that the team at Bacton is still very keen to get your responses on what type of information you'd like to see from them for the future. I'm going to now take over the screen for a second. I just have a closing slide, hopefully, that I can find. I'm delighted to say that so far my dog hasn't interrupted once during the course of the presentation today, which is good news. In closing up, I'd just like to thank all our speakers, Jenny Pemberton, Jonathan Thorns, Michael Mahone, and Bridget, who was also on the line earlier. Thank you to all those people that registered to keep up to date, and keep up to date with EEGR by registering for our weekly newsletter. And so go on the EEGR website and you can make sure you get our weekly e-letter, and also to see our Membership Monday updates as well. So if you are an EEGR member, you can promote yourself through that. If you have any comments for me, there's my contact details. Please do let me know what you thought about this session, what future sessions you'd like to hear about, what future sessions you'd like to hear also from National Grid, both on the gas and the electric side as well. And do keep in contact with us with any questions that you may have on any subjects. So thank you all very much indeed for your participation, and look forward to hopefully seeing you again in the not too distant future, face to face with me. Anyway, lovely to see you. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.